How does your military experience and the leadership there kind of translate into games? Anyone listening in is just got that's really cool. You went from working in the military to now like doing leadership in Riot in what was a Riot Games that was growing very quickly at the time because League of Legends was
Yeah,
in its infancy in 2011. So
right,
what
right.
was how did that translate?
It's interesting. Leadership is a generalist skill set. For a lot of people talk a lot of different. I've heard a lot of people have a lot of different takes on where leadership comes from, who's good at it, these sorts of things. Is it natural? Is it learned? Is it blah blah blah? And I think there's elements that there's some people that are more intuitively gifted at leadership than others. I think that's fair to say. I think leadership is something that can be learned. The military gave me a unique opportunity to actually have training in leadership, which is fairly rare. A lot of companies recognize that leaders are really valuable, that they have an outsized impact, usually positive or negative, but they don't really know what to do with that because, like, how do you? Okay, I guess go try leading people, and we'll see who's good at it and who's not. And if you're not good at it, do you get Peter principled at some point where okay, now you're stuck in a role you're incompetent at, but we can't bring you down, but you're really good at engineering, so we want to keep your engineering skill in, but we made you an engineering lead, and so now we're confused about what to do with you. And but leadership is something that can be learned. I also think the military gave me a lot of examples of leadership. Some good ones that I was able to say, how do I operate like this? How do I learn from this in a way that's going to help me be a better leader? And also bad ones that also can help me learn to be a better leader. I didn't like how you were leading me. Maybe that's a personal thing, but maybe that's also a problem with your leadership style. Maybe I don't take that forward. Maybe I'm careful about how I approach that. So I think leadership was it's been the through line of my career, even going back before college, arguably with things in the Boy Scouts and whatnot, in the military and in game development. Leadership has been that thing that I continue to do, continue to operate in, continue to teach and train and try to become better at over time because it is an endless journey and there's always something new to learn in the leadership space. And I think when I got to Riot, I was well set up to lead, even if I didn't understand game development. And so, yeah, the logistics piece wasn't as directly helpful, but the leadership and how teams work together and how you might encourage people to collaborate well and drawing the lines between when do you interact and get involved. I've messed all that stuff up a ton. And in the military, I messed it up a lot. Recognizing that and going, how can I do it better this time? And then just continuing to do that throughout my time at Riot. That was how leadership really played a role. So has high application. It has high application, I think, no matter where you are, because every organization does need leaders.
So someone listening in is thinking, first, I think a lot of people view leadership as something that you learn over time. Like to become a leader in a company, you have to go through the kind of the ranks and kind of rise up, meet the right people, learn the right lessons. But I love your perspective, which is coming from the military, having already engaged in a lot of leadership facets. You're bringing that over into games. How would you define leadership in a company like Riot? What does it mean to actually be a leader? Because I understand there's a thing about kind of promoting proper values, listening to people, bringing teams together under a common vision. But for someone listening that wants like an actual kind of way of explaining it, because sometimes it's wish-washy, right? Like I don't want to
Oh
say,
yeah.
like what does
Well,
it mean to be
I
a
mean,
leader, right?
go type into Google, define leadership. Like, give me some definitions of leadership, and you're going to find a bunch of different articles on a lot of different things. For me, I actually went and did that exercise because I was trying to figure out, I know I'm leading. What does that mean? What am I doing? So Riot had an answer to this, and it was related to the culture of the company. And it was that I think it's not the definition of leadership, but it was the expectation of leadership was to maintain the right goals and create the culture that would allow us to reach them. I don't know if anybody there would have articulated it that way, but that was what they were encouraging leaders to do. A very simple thing that I learned very early in my time there is as a producer, I was a leader. And as a producer and leader, my job was to make sure bad things didn't reach players. There was no, well, somebody else said it was a good idea, so whatever, I guess I just execute it, even though I think it's a bad idea. That was unacceptable. And that was made clear to me within weeks. I thought I was going to get fired. First time I thought I was going to get fired at Riot. There were many. But that was the first time I thought I was going to get fired, was when somebody shut down a really bad idea that I knew was a really bad idea, but I was from the military. And the military, at least the units I was in, it tended not to be as wise to when somebody who outranked you which was a big deal in the military, said, we're going to go do this thing. You didn't start asking a ton of questions and saying, I'm not sure that's a good idea. And so I brought that to Riot, and that was the wrong frame. I needed to be the one who was objecting, and that became very clear to me. But I went through this exercise of going, okay, well, what does it mean to be a leader? What is leadership? I ended up looking at all these different things, looking at common elements, and I boiled it down to something that I wanted to keep fairly short, which is leadership is influencing others towards a goal. That is how I define it. There are 3 key elements there. The most important, I think, is actually the goal. You have a goal, you're trying to get somewhere. If you're not trying to get somewhere, you can't lead anybody, because where are they following you to? They might just be following you because they like following you, but that's not actually leadership. That's just a bunch of people who like to follow you. It's subtly different. You have others involved. There's ideas that I don't want to like pick at the semantics of self-leadership. If you want to engage with that, that's fine. But functionally and definitionally, I don't think self-leadership is as much a thing. When you're leading, others are following. That's the implication. If you're trying to lead and nobody's following, it means you're not leading successfully. And then the third piece of that is influencing. And this can take so many forms. In the military, I could influence by ordering somebody to do something. I could also suggest things. I could also coach. I could teach. I could mentor. I could set an example. And you have all these tools at your disposal to influence the organization. You develop relationships, you develop friendships, you figure out what the politics are, the influence games of the organization, and you figure out how to get things moving in the right direction according to the goal. And so leaders do this. They force multiply the efforts of those around them by influencing others towards the goal. And so those are the key elements that I saw in leadership.
What happens when you have multiple leaders kind of all vying for the leadership? I wouldn't say position, but you're trying to influence what you think are your values or that goal you said that you're trying to bring everyone to accomplish. In many kind of companies, you have multiple leaders, and sometimes, from my perspective as well, it's difficult to assess really how that rank works. Where perhaps in the military, it's a much taller organization. It's really clear to see kind of how everyone stacks up, but in a lot of organizations nowadays, it's a bit of a flatter structure and leadership is spread out. So how does it work when you have different leaders kind of maybe not clashing, because I don't want to make it sound kind of very combat, but almost they're just trying to influence together or trying to influence at similar times?
So the big thing for me is, are we aligned on the goal or not? And that's something that through influence, those leaders are trying to create. One of the things I joke about is, if you don't know what your goal is, suggest one, and the people who are supposed to own the goal will come out and tell you you're wrong, or they'll be like, that's it, perfect, let's go in that direction. If a bunch of people come out and they all have a different goal, it's going to be very difficult to get everybody following the group of you to go to the same place. And so one huge aspect of leadership is this idea of, yes, you have hierarchies inside of almost all structures. And the military, despite the high degree of verticality in the organization, lots and lots of hierarchy, there are interesting circumstances where somebody who outranks somebody else is nonetheless is able to be out-influenced by that other person. And that's it by design sometimes, but it's also because sometimes somebody who might have a lower rank may have, for lack of a better term, benefactors inside of the system that are higher rank. And so you have to be careful, and you start learning these things. And we could say, well, that stuff's not ideal, but it is real. It just emerges inside of human organization. And you do, I think, want to limit it. There are absolutely manipulative and negative versions of politics, which is what I'm basically describing. But politics always exist. And the question is, are you willing to engage with that space? The more senior you get inside of an organization, the more you're pushed into engaging in that space. So if I have a group of leaders, for me, I've often worked at either the team of teams, or maybe one layer up from that. So I've had I kind of run the gamut from I'm just one person on a team helping that team, but I often had leaders around me. And a huge question I always had is, where are we trying to go together? If I can get us all going in the same direction together, we are more likely to succeed. If you think the goal is, to use an actual example, perfect visual fidelity, or the best map that we've ever made, or something like that, and I think it's getting something that has high competitive integrity, looks good enough to last for a long time, and serves our current audience, even though there's an overlap between that, there's also a lot that might be different. Which one is more important? Are we going to align on that? And if we don't, you're going to constantly pulling those you have more influence over towards, unbelievable perfection and visual fidelity of the map, and I'm going to be trying to pull people towards competitive integrity, gameplay clarity, and trying to get this thing out the door as rapidly as possible. And again, we're all trying to get the thing out there as rapidly as possible. I don't want to, besmirch the leaders that were around me in that case, in case they hear this. But there's this idea of like, what are we actually trying to do? What brings this together? And having somebody who owns that decision, be it either a leader of leaders or somebody who has the expertise in the space, where we can say, we're all to some extent peers, but you have expertise in an area that our team is operating within. So we give you more authority in that space. Like a simple example, let's say you had an art lead inside of a context, and I'm a producer. Maybe there's a product manager. Maybe there's a QA lead and design lead. Cool. Maybe the product manager might be thinking about this. I'm defining the audience and I'm defining what it means for this thing to be ready to ship. The QA is saying, I'm defining the quality bar. The designer is saying, I need this to actually fit within the broader context of the systems of the game. And the art lead is going, hey, I am making sure that my team is doing the right thing according to the right style guide. Also, I have a lot of authority over who gets promoted inside of the art organization, who doesn't. I have a lot of authority over the tools that we're choosing to use as art. But I might go talk to the engineering team when it comes to like, where do I put the assets when they go into the game, right? How do we get all this stuff checked into Perforce or GitHub or wherever we're doing that? Like, what is that? How do I make that simple? And so there's this constant interaction between these leaders and their areas of expertise. I think it's often helpful to have somebody who is what's the Roman phrase? The first citizen, right? The leader among the leaders who can break ties. But you don't have to have that. I've actually operated in systems where that wasn't present. Everybody owned their own space and then collaborated with each other. And then the key thing was, are we going in the same direction? That's what you're always trying to create, however you structure it. So you can do that by having one person who is the decider of this is the overall direction. And now everybody has their areas that they lead within. And we all then collectively lead the team or teams underneath us. But yeah. So the most important thing is we're all going in the same direction.